The verdict was delivered not in a courtroom, but in the dusty main street of Redemption Gulch, under a sky the color of a tarnished silver dollar. 18-year-old Finn stood before Mr. Abernathy, the town's self-appointed patriarch and the man who had overseen his meager existence since the fever took his parents a decade prior. Beside Finn, his German shepherd, Kaiser, sat with a low rumble in his chest, sensing the tension that called in the air like a dry snake. Mr. Abernathy, a man whose spine was as rigid as his starched collar, pointed a bony finger not at Finn, but at the ground beside him. This obsession, he declared, his voice carrying with the practiced authority of a man who was never contradicted, is an affront to decency. You burrow like a mole, you smell of damp earth, and you shame the memory of your parents. They were good, God-fearing people who lived under the sky, not beneath the soil. A few onlookers, merchants and drifters, paused to watch the spectacle. They were the silent enablers, the chorus of quiet judgment that gave Abernathy his power. They had already given Finn his name, Dirt Boy. It was a name whispered behind cupped hands when he passed, a name that stuck to him like the clay beneath his fingernails. Finn said nothing. His silence was not one of submission, but of a deep, unbreachable stubbornness. He had learned long ago that words were useless against men like Abernathy. His gaze was fixed on a point just beyond the man's shoulder, where the parched plains gave way to the low, rolling hills that held his future. You are 18 now, Abernathy continued, his tone turning to one of finality. My charity has reached its end. You will not bring your filth into this town. You will not disgrace my household. You are, as of this moment, on your own. Find your place amongst the worms and the roots you so admire. He turned his back, a dismissal more absolute than any blow. The crowd dispersed, their curiosity satisfied. Finn was officially an outcast, his sentence pronounced and witnessed. He looked down at Kaiser, whose warm, intelligent eyes met his. He placed a hand on the dog's head, the thick fur a small point of comfort in a world that had just shrunk to the space he and his animal occupied. He had no inheritance, no trade, no welcome. He had only a set of calloused hands, a dog, and an idea that everyone else called madness. With the town of Redemption Gulch shrinking behind him, Finn felt not the sting of exile but the cold, clean relief of a chain snapping. He walked with a steady, ground-eating stride, a small bundle of possessions slung over his shoulder. It held a tattered blanket, a small hand pick, a shovel head he'd salvaged from the smithy scrap pile, and a tin of dried jerky. Kaiser trotted faithfully at his heel, his ears pricked forward, alert to the rustle of sagebrush and the cry of a distant hawk. Their destination was a place no one else wanted, a scar on the landscape a few miles out, the remains of his family's old homestead. A fire, swift and merciless, had claimed it when he was a boy, leaving nothing but a blackened foundation and a few skeletal timbers pointing at the sky. But the fire could not touch what lay beneath. His father, a man of foresight, had dug a deep and spacious root cellar into the hillside, lined with stone and capped with thick earth and sod. As a child, Finn had loved its cool, subterranean silence, the way the air tasted of minerals and quiet. Now, it was his only hope. The journey was a slow, deliberate process of putting distance between himself and the judgment of others. He moved carefully, conserving his energy, his eyes scanning the terrain for water and signs of game. He and Kaiser were a silent, self-contained unit, moving through a landscape that was as indifferent to their survival as the people in the town had been. When he finally crested the last rise and saw the familiar silhouette of the lone, fire-scarred oak that marked the property, a feeling of grim homecoming settled in his chest. The place was desolate, haunted by memory, yet it was his. He slid down the dusty slope to the cellar's entrance. The heavy wooden doors had long since rotted away, leaving a dark, gaping maw in the side of the hill. A wave of musty, damp air washed over him. It was a smell of decay, but also of deep, undisturbed earth. To anyone else, it was a tomb. To Finn, it was a beginning. He looked at Kaiser, who whined softly, peering into the blackness. "It's all right, boy," Finn murmured, his voice rough from disuse. "This is it. This is home." The first task was reclamation. Armed with the shovel head, which he painstakingly fitted to a sturdy branch of deadwood, Finn began the arduous process of clearing out years of accumulated debris. leaves, dirt, and the skeletal remains of small animals that had sought shelter and found a final resting place had to be hauled out bucketful by bucketful. Kaiser, ever the diligent partner, would often stand guard at the entrance, his low growls warning away a curious coyote or a scavenging vulture. The air inside was thick and stagnant, but as Finn worked, digging his way deeper, he felt the temperature begin to change. The oppressive heat of the late summer sun, which baked the plains outside, could not penetrate this far. Here, there was only the steady, profound cool of the deep earth. The cellar was larger than he remembered, a long, rectangular chamber with walls of fitted stone that spoke of his father's careful labor. After 2 days of relentless digging, he had cleared a space large enough to stand upright and stretch out. He laid his blanket in the farthest corner, the driest spot he could find. That first night, as darkness fell and the prairie outside came alive with the yips and cries of nocturnal hunters, Finn lay in the absolute blackness of his new home and listened. He heard nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the soft thump of Kaiser's tail against the dirt floor. There was no wind whistling through cracked window panes, no rattle of a loose shutter. There was only the immense, silent weight of the earth around him, a buffer against the world. It was a profound and unbreachable peace. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, not since before his parents were gone, a sense of safety. This wasn't a grave, it was a fortress. The ground itself was his shield. He ran a hand over the cool, damp stone of the wall, feeling its solidity, its permanence. Here, he was not dirt boy, here, he was the master of his own small, subterranean kingdom. A quiet, fierce determination settled into his bones. They had cast him out, but they had inadvertently given him the one thing he needed most, a place where his strange affinity for the earth was not a weakness, but a strength. He would not just survive here, he would build a life from the ground down. The days settled into a rhythm of labor, a relentless cycle of sunrise to sunset dictated by need and fueled by a stubborn will to live. Finn's primary focus was turning the raw cellar into a habitable space, a task that required ingenuity and immense physical effort. He spent a week just improving the entrance, digging a slope trench and lining it with flat stones to prevent washout during the infrequent but violent prairie thunderstorms. He fashioned a new door from salvaged planks he found miles away at a collapsed prospector's shack, reinforcing it with strips of scavenged metal and hinging it on thick pegs of ironwood. His next project was air. The cellar was safe, but it was also stale. He needed ventilation. Studying the slope of the hill, he identified a spot directly above the rear of the chamber and began to dig a narrow shaft straight up. It was terrifying, claustrophobic work, lying on his back and clawing at the dirt and rock above him, using a bucket on a rope to haul the debris down. Kaiser would often sit at the bottom of the shaft, whining with concern, until Finn would call down reassurances. After 4 days of painstaking work, his hand broke through the surface into the open air. He lined the shaft with stones to prevent its collapse and fashioned a small, hooded cap for the top to keep rain out while letting stale air escape. He then created a second, lower intake vent near the door, creating a natural, passive airflow that slowly began to dry out the interior. It was then that he began to truly understand the principle that guided his survival. The townsfolk, living in their wooden houses, fought a constant battle with the elements. Their thin walls baked in the summer sun and bled heat during the winter winds. They were exposed. He, on the other hand, was insulated by the greatest insulator of all, the earth itself. Below the frost line, which in this region was about 4 feet down, the ground maintained a remarkably stable temperature, hovering around 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. His cellar was a pocket of this stability. It was a natural heat sink in the summer and a bulwark against the lethal cold of winter. While others spent a fortune on firewood just to stay warm, he would need only a small, efficient fire to raise the ambient temperature of his shelter to a comfortable level. His home wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a perfectly designed thermal battery. One afternoon, while working to expand a small alcove at the back of the cellar for food storage, the tip of his pickaxe struck the stone wall with a hollow, resonant thud that was distinctly different from the solid clink of rock. Curiosity piqued, Finn set aside the pickaxe and began to carefully pry at the stones with a crowbar he had forged from an old axle. The mortar, ancient and crumbling, gave way easily. Behind the fitted stones, there was not solid earth, but a dark, empty space. A cool, clean draught, smelling of deep stone and minerals, flowed out, extinguishing his lantern. Relighting it, he held it up to the opening. It revealed not a small pocket, but the entrance to a passage. His heart hammered in his chest. For a moment, he hesitated, a primal fear of the unknown depths holding him back. But his curiosity was stronger. With Kaiser sniffing cautiously at his heels, Finn squeezed through the narrow opening. He found himself in a space that was not man-made. It was a natural limestone cavern, a winding network of small chambers and passages carved by some ancient, long-forgotten underground stream. The air was dry and still, and the temperature was even cooler and more stable than in the cellar. He walked for what felt like 100 yards, his lantern light dancing off walls that glittered with calcite deposits. The cavern system was a labyrinth, but it was safe, the rock ceiling solid and arched. This discovery was a revelation that fundamentally changed the scope of his entire existence. This wasn't just a cellar anymore. This was a subterranean estate. He now had separate, naturally refrigerated chambers perfect for storing meat and vegetables, spaces that would remain far below freezing temperatures even when he had a fire going in his main living area. He had a secure, hidden extension to his home, a place no one on the surface could ever suspect existed. It was a secret gift from the earth, a reward for his willingness to dig deeper. Standing in the profound silence of the cavern, a sense of awe washed over him. The world above had cast him out for being too close to the ground, but the ground itself had opened up and given him a kingdom. He now had more than a shelter, he had a sanctuary, a place of immense potential. The coming winter, once a source of dread, now seemed like a challenge he was uniquely equipped to meet. As autumn painted the prairie in shades of rust and gold, the first hints of the coming cold began to snake across the plains. Finn worked with a renewed sense of urgency, using the new cavern system to his full advantage. He had managed to hunt and preserve a small deer, and the meat now hung in one of the deeper, colder chambers, perfectly preserved. He foraged for wild onions, potatoes, and hardy greens, storing them in a separate part of the cavern where the humidity was just right. His life was solitary but not lonely. Kaiser was a constant, warm presence, a partner in work and a guard in rest. To heat his main living chamber, he constructed a small, ingenious stove from a rusted metal drum he'd hauled back from an abandoned mine. The key was the flue. Instead of venting it straight up through his air shaft, which would create a visible plume of smoke, he ran a long pipe of interlocking clay sections through a narrow side tunnel he dug himself, venting the smoke a good 50 yards away amongst a thicket of dense brush. The smoke would dissipate among the branches, nearly invisible to any casual observer. But even with his precautions, a thin, hazy wisp was sometimes visible on still, cold mornings. It was enough to start whispers in Redemption Gulch. The story of Dirt Boy had become a local legend, a cautionary tale for unruly children. Most assumed he had perished from starvation or exposure long ago. But a few hunters, tracking game in the hills, had seen the faint trace of smoke rising from the haunted Abernathy plot. The rumors reached the ears of an old man named Rowan, a former trapper who lived on the edge of town, distrustful of people and tired of the world. He was a man who valued practicality above all else and had little time for gossip. But the idea of someone surviving out on that desolate patch of land intrigued him. It defied logic. One crisp morning, driven by a curiosity he couldn't shake, he set out, not with malice, but with the quiet intent of a man who simply needed to see for himself. He found the disguised stove vent first, then backtracked to the cleverly concealed cellar door. He stood there for a long time, just listening. He heard the faint chink of metal on stone. He knocked on the heavy wooden door. Inside, everything went silent. Kaiser let out a single, deep-throated bark. Finn froze, his hand clamped on Kaiser's muzzle. His heart pounded against his ribs. To be discovered was his greatest fear. It meant being dragged back to the world that had rejected him, his sanctuary exposed and violated. He stood in the dim lantern light, every muscle tensed, listening. After a long silence, a voice, raspy and low, came from the other side of the door. "I ain't the sheriff," the voice said. "And I ain't Abernathy. Just an old man who's seen smoke where there shouldn't be any." I mean you no harm. Finn remained silent, his mind racing. It could be a trick. He slowly moved to a small, concealed peephole he had drilled in the door, a tiny opening camouflaged as a knot in the wood. He peered through and saw a man, old and weathered, with a fringe of grey hair visible beneath a worn felt hat. He was alone, leaning on a sturdy walking stick, his posture relaxed, not threatening. He looked less like a threat and more like a piece of the landscape itself. Finn made a decision. He couldn't live in fear forever. Keeping one hand on Kaiser's collar, he slowly unbarred the heavy door and opened it a crack. The sudden shaft of bright daylight was blinding. Rowan squinted, his eyes adjusting to the gloom within. What he saw astonished him. Not a filthy hovel, but a neat, organized, and functional dwelling. He saw the stone walls, the clever stove, the shelves lined with preserved food. He saw the boy, thin but strong, with eyes that were wary but intelligent. And he saw the entrance to the cavern behind him. Well, I'll be, Rowan breathed, a slow smile cracking his weathered face. They call you Dirt Boy. I'd call you smart. He looked from Finn to the warm, dry space. Winter's coming. A bad one, by the looks of the sky and the thickness of the beaver pelts this season. That box you're living in, he said, pointing back towards town with his thumb, is a coffin waiting for the cold to seal it. This, he gestured to the cellar, this is life. Finn, still cautious, simply asked, what do you want? Rowan met his gaze directly. I want to make a trade. I'm old. My hands ain't what they used to be for building. But I have things you don't. Tools. Real steel. Maybe some glass for a small skylight. I got knowledge of tanning hides, things you'll need. I'm offering a partnership. My supplies and my know-how for a corner of this warmth when the blizzards hit. A fair trade. The alliance between the boy who trusted the earth and the old man who trusted nothing else was forged not on sentiment, but on the unyielding logic of survival. Rowan, true to his word, returned the next day, not on a horse that would leave obvious tracks, but on foot, carrying a heavy canvas roll. Inside were the treasures that would transform Finn's shelter into a home. A proper saw, a hammer with a full claw, a small hand-cranked drill, and a box of precious, mismatched nails. Most importantly, he brought 2 thick panes of glass, salvaged from an old abandoned church window. Their first joint project was a skylight. Rowan, with his years of experience, showed Finn how to build a sturdy, waterproof frame. They carefully excavated a section of the thick sod roof, laid the frame in, and sealed it with a mixture of clay and tar Rowan had brought. When they were finished, a shaft of pure, natural sunlight pierced the gloom of the cellar for the first time, illuminating the space with a warm, golden glow. It was a profound change, chasing away the last of the subterranean shadows and making the dwelling feel less like a cave and more like a cottage. With the new tools, their progress accelerated dramatically. They built sturdy, floor-to-ceiling shelves that lined an entire wall, organizing Finn's supplies with an efficiency that pleased Rowan's practical soul. They constructed a proper workbench where Finn could repair his gear and Rowan could work on tanning the hides from the animals Finn trapped. Rowan taught him how to properly smoke meat, a skill that extended the life of his provisions tenfold. They ventured into the cavern system together, mapping its extent and designating specific chambers for different purposes, a deep freeze for fresh meat, a root cellar for vegetables, and a dry storage area for grains and tools. The work was hard, their days long and filled with the satisfying ache of productive labor. A quiet respect grew between them. Rowan never pried into Finn's past, and Finn never asked about the loneliness that seemed to cling to the old man like dust. They spoke of practical things, the angle of a cut, the tension of a snare, the signs of an approaching storm. Their companionship was built on the shared project of defying the coming winter, a foundation far stronger than idle words. As the first snowflakes began to drift down from a grey, swollen sky, their subterranean home was ready. It was a marvel of scavenged ingenuity and hard-won knowledge, a testament to what could be achieved when one person's vision was joined with another's experience. The blizzard did not arrive, it descended. It came without warning in the dead of night, a sudden, violent assault of wind and snow that seemed intent on scouring the very memory of life from the plains. The wind shrieked like a banshee, a physical force that hammered against the world. In Redemption Gulch, the townsfolk huddled in their wooden homes, stuffing rags into the cracks around windows and doors, feeding their fireplaces with a desperate, fearful hunger. The cold was a living entity, seeping through the walls, turning every draft into a blade of ice. Structures groaned under the weight of the accumulating snow. But 80 feet underground, in the heart of the hill, there was a profound and almost unnerving calm. Finn and Rowan sat by their small stove, the gentle orange light flickering across their faces. The only sound was the soft hiss of the burning wood and the contented snores of Kaiser, curled up on a warm patch of the floor. They had laid a thermometer Rowan owned on a shelf. It registered a comfortable 62 degrees. Rowan had placed another one just outside their reinforced door, in the covered entryway. Earlier, he had opened the door a crack to check it. The mercury had frozen solid at the bottom of the tube, well below -40. The difference was staggering, a testament to the insulating power of the earth that surrounded them. "Listen to that," Rowan murmured, tilting his head. The high-pitched scream of the wind was completely gone, filtered out by tons of soil and rock. All they could hear was a deep, low-frequency rumble, the vibration of the storm's fury traveling through the ground itself. It was the sound of a distant, powerless giant. For 3 days, the world above ceased to exist. They ate smoked venison and roasted potatoes, drank hot tea made from herbs Finn had gathered, and talked. Rowan told stories of trapping in the high mountains, of winters that would snap trees in half. Finn, in turn, spoke quietly of his parents, of his father's belief that a man should work with the land, not against it. He spoke of the years of being an outcast, of the single-minded focus that had driven him to this place. Outside, the blizzard was a killer. It was claiming livestock, collapsing barns, and seeping into the homes of the unprepared. It was delivering a brutal verdict on a way of life that prioritized appearance over substance. Down below, in the home of the dirt boy, there was warmth, food, and safety. The storm was not a threat, it was a validation. It was the ultimate proof that Finn's obsession had not been madness, but a deeper kind of wisdom. When the wind finally died and a weak, watery sun appeared in the sky, the world had been remade in white. The snow was piled in monstrous drifts, burying fences, erasing roads, and swallowing smaller buildings whole. It took Finn and Rowan half a day just to dig a tunnel out from their entrance. When they emerged, blinking in the fierce, reflected glare, the sheer scale of the storm's impact was breathtaking. The silence was absolute. Redemption Gulch was a town entombed. Smoke rose from only a few chimneys, a grim sign of the devastation within. They knew, without needing to be told, that people had died. The proud, drafty houses of men like Abernathy had become frozen tombs. Over the next few days, a new reality set in. Survival was no longer about social standing, it was about BTUs and stored calories. Rowan and Finn did not march into town as saviors. That was not their way. Instead, they began a quiet, discreet campaign of aid. They identified a few families they knew to be decent and struggling, the widow with 3 small children, the blacksmith whose workshop had collapsed, and approached them under the cover of dusk. They brought smoked meat, sacks of potatoes, and, most importantly, knowledge. Finn, with Rowan's help, showed the blacksmith how to insulate his new foundation with a thick wall of packed sod and earth. He explained to the widow's eldest son the principle of digging down, of using the earth's stable temperature to create a small, protected cellar for the worst of the winter. He didn't preach, he demonstrated. The name Dirt Boy was never spoken again. In its place, a quiet respect began to grow. People started to notice that Finn's methods, once mocked, were the ones that worked. The following summer, a change took place in the valley. Several families began digging new, deeper root cellars, not just for storage, but as emergency shelters. They came to Finn, not as an outcast, but as a consultant, asking quiet questions about ventilation, drainage, and structural support. He never sought recognition, but his legacy was being written into the very landscape. Years later, travelers passing through the region would note the unusual architecture, the sturdy, well-built homes that were often banked with earth up to the windows, each with a sturdy, subterranean shelter connected to the main house. The community had learned the blizzard's hard lesson. They had learned that resilience is not always found in building higher, but sometimes in digging deeper. Finn remained in his hillside home, expanding his network of caverns, creating a place of quiet abundance, a testament to the simple, powerful idea that the earth will provide for those who are willing to listen to it. He had taken the world's rejection and used it as a blueprint for a better way to live, proving that what others see as a flaw can, in the right conditions, become the cornerstone of survival, and even triumph. What have you been told is a weakness, that might just be your greatest strength? What foolishness are you cultivating that could, one day, save you? If you've ever felt like an outcast for seeing the world differently, perhaps you're not the one who's lost. Perhaps you're just the first to find a new way home. Think on that, and when you're ready for another story of resilience, we'll be here.